And now it's time to preview an upcoming game with Ryan Metzler.
Hey everybody, it's Ryan Metzler here again, and today we're going to do another Kickstarter preview. This time we're going to take a look at Black Hat, which is a game by Dragon Dawn Publications. It's a game for 2 to 6 players, and it's a trick taker. Now this is not your conventional trick taker, it's a trick taker that also involves a board, and trying to take tricks in order to progress yourself or move your opponents into bad positions on this board as a hacker. So you're a hacker trying to leave the littlest amount of trace while accessing the most amount of information in order to essentially win the game. Having a low score being good. You don't want to be seen, you want to acquire data, but keep the lowest score. So, real quick, why don't we check out what's going to come inside of this box with a reminder that it's a prototype, of course. We'll see how the game plays, and then we'll come back here at the end, and I'll sum it all up for you. So here you can see the components for Black Hat. Now just a quick reminder, these are prototype components, not final components. So what you get will have the same function, but not necessarily the same form as what you see here in this video. Now, Black Hat is in essence a trick-taking game that's going to be incorporating a board for some extra play aspects to the game. So right here we have a deck of cards, and in this deck of cards are suits of different ranks. So you'll see here we have 9, 13, 7, 8. It's going to be 1 all the way up to 13, and then there's going to be wild cards, which are a value of 14 if played on their own, and a wild if they're played in a set. And there's going to be this Black Hat card, which is also going to be a wild card, so it's a value of 14 on its own, or it's going to be a wild if it's played in a set, but it has some special characteristics that we'll talk about shortly. Each player has a pawn that's going to start in either the public server, well, 1 in the public server and 1 in the back door. Now this is a game about hacking, so you're trying to be the best hacker, and you want to end your pawns in positions on this board that are going to be worth the fewest points. You want a low score in this game, so something like -1 is good, or -5, whereas 3 or 5 is not nearly as good. So you're going to be trying to advance your pawns out here through card play. Now the way this is going to work is you're going to shuffle up this deck of cards, and you're going to deal out cards to each player. But the first thing you'll do after you've shuffled up the deck is you're going to reveal the top card. This is going to determine who's going to get this Black Hat card. So 3. We would go 3 spaces from the dealer, so if there were 4 players, the 4th player would get the Black Hat card. In this case, there are 5 players, so again, the 4th player would still get the Black Hat card, but if it were a 4, the 5th player, if it were a 5, the dealer, and so forth and so on. So this card could get set aside or shuffled back in, however you'd like to deal with that. But then you're going to deal out 10 cards to each player. In this case, the 4th player would have the Black Hat card, and everyone else would be dealt 10, while that player would be dealt 9. Once everyone has their hands, you're going to start playing the game. Okay, so now everybody has their hand dealt. We have the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th players, and you can see that our person with the red hat is the 4th player. Now the person to the right of the red hat is going to start, so that'd be the person before them. In this case, it's going to be the 3rd player, and they are going to be the leader of the first trick. Now, as you know, these cards range in form from 1 all the way up to 13, and this player doesn't have a 1 or a 13, but they have several other cards. When you have the lead, you're going to be able to play either an individual single card of any rank, or you may play a set of cards that are the same rank. For example, this player could play 2 8s, or they could play 2 9s, or they could play 2 5s, or if they had 3 of something, they could play 3 5s, for example. Now when they lead, they're going to lead either that single card or a pair. Let's say that they decided to lead 2 9s. And after that, the next player, in this case player 4, is going to look at their hand. They're going to decide what they want to play. They have a choice. They can either follow with a single card, again, you can always play a single card, or they can follow with an equal number of cards of any rank they want. So for example, they could play 2 10s if they wanted to, beating the 2 9s, or they could play 2 6s if they wanted to, which would of course not beat the 2 9s. In addition, since they have the Black Hat, they could play that as a wild card. So they could play, for example, 2 5s if they wanted to. And we'll talk about a black hand round shortly. For now, let's go ahead and say that they play 2 10s. And of course, you go around the table in this manner. This player maybe plays 2 13s. Now they're winning. And then we go back to the start player here. And they're going to play, they can't beat 2 13s, so maybe they just decide to play a single 1. And finally, our last player plays, and you're going to see that he again can't beat 2 13s, so maybe he decides to play his 2. Now in this case, the player that played the 2 13s is going to win the trick. Let's say that was going to be our 3rd player. So 1, 2, 3 here. This player here would have won this trick. And let's go ahead and say that he's the black player. The black player now has a choice out on this board. He won the trick. He's going to move all of the cards aside, and he can decide which one of his 2 pawns he would like to move. he can move either of them forward following these arrows. So you'll see he'll move from 5 points, which is bad, you don't want points, up to 2 points if he were to move his pawn here. Or, on this one, he would go from 2 to 2. So the first initial move that makes the most sense is go to 5 to 2 points. In future moves, he'd be able to move to 1 point, then -1 if he were to want to, and so forth and so on. A player that were to move after him would jump over his space. So if the white player won the next trick, they would be able to move their pawn directly from 5 to 1, and they would be losing 4 points, which in this case is good. Alternatively, if one of your opponents, let's say the white player was already on the -1 space, if one of your opponents happens to be on a negative space, instead of moving your own pawn, you can move them off of the negative spaces, essentially giving them more points, which is bad. So if this were the case, I could move the -1 to the +1 here, and that player would have gained 2 points, a bad scenario for them. At this point, the player that won the trick, the black player, is going to pick up their hand and they're going to have the option of playing or leading the trick. They must lead the trick. And maybe they decide to lead with their strong 3 11s. Pretty hard to beat a 3 of a kind of a high card. Then each player would have the chance to either follow and play the same number of cards of whatever rank they wanted to and try and win the trick, or they could play a single card, and whoever played the highest set that matches the original number of cards played would win that trick and advance their pawn. So let's say black decided, or the black managed to win this again, they could advance either one of their 2 pawns on the board in order to lose points, hopefully have more negative or at least closer to 0 points. And the game will go on in this way, each round playing out in this manner, until at least one person runs out of cards. Or the game could theoretically end, and we'll talk about how that's going to happen in a little bit. But you'll play a round until one or more players runs out of cards during a trick. At that point, that round will end. Now, there's one card that can change the way that this game is going to play, and that's going to be that black hat card that we talked about earlier. This one here. This black hat card changes the rules of the game when you use it, either as an individual card, a 14, or as part of a set, for example, a pair of 9s. When you play this card out as a part of a set or on its own, it's going to make it so that the lowest card set that matches the lead number of cards will win the trick. So for example, if the first player in the lead were to play, let's say they were to play 2 11s. Let's go ahead and look at it that way. This player plays 2 11s, and then the next player goes ahead, they look at their cards and they play 2 11s. Now, the later set of cards that has the highest rank will win. So right now, 2 11s is beaten by the second set of 2 11s. That second player is winning the trick. Our third player then decides, well, he doesn't really want to do this, but he's going to play a pair of 7s to get them out of his hand to end the round sooner. So now we have the 11s are still winning, and we have another player play, and he decides that he still can't win. He's just going to play a single 2. But then our last player here picks up his cards and he's like, I don't want this player with the pair of 11s to win. I want the player who has the lowest cards to win. So he's going to play his pair of 9s. Or he could play it as a single card if he wanted. Actually, he has to play it as a pair of 9s. It always has to be played as the same number of cards as the lead. So he's going to play these. And now the 11s don't win, but the 7s do. They're the lowest cards that match the set that's that was led. So the 7s are going to win this trick, and this player must now take the trick. Now this player, the player with the pair of 7s, not only takes the trick and gets to advance one of their pawns, but has to pick up some of these cards from the table. So let's go ahead and look at all of these cards. They won the trick, and the first thing that kind of comes into play here is that they must take the black hat into their hand. So whoever played that pair of 7s is going to take this black hat into their hand. In addition, they now have a choice. They can either take all of these cards, adding them to their hand, and the reason they might want to do this because it could make their hand stronger. For example, having these 3 11s in your hand is great. It allows you to win a trick and position yourself out onto the board, but having cards in your hand at the end of the round is bad, so you have to weigh, is it worth picking up all of these cards or not? If they decide they don't want to pick up all of the cards, they must pick up at least the 2 highest value cards. Because 2 cards were led, you have to pick up at least the 2 highest value cards. So they have their choice, either the black hat and all of these cards, or the black hat and the 2 highest. And they would take those and add them to their hand. In addition to picking those up, the white player moves their pawn, of course, jumping over the black player and moving from 5 to 1 points. And of course, you would play on in this manner, playing your tricks out, trying to advance your pawns by winning the tricks, and maneuvering using that black hat card and the wild cards to try and out-manipulate your opponents into getting these tricks played, and sometimes making them pick up a whole handful of cards, which could be bad. Now, the round will end when at least one player is out of cards. And how you're going to measure points for each round is that you're going to look out at this board and you're going to see where each of your pawns is standing. So let's say that black has a pawn standing here and here. This would be worth 3 points. And we'll say that black had played all of their cards. They have no points in hand. White, let's say that they have their pawns here and here. So now they have 2 points. Of course, we'd be marking these all out here. But in addition, let's say that white had some cards left over in their hand. Let's say they had this pair of 7s in their hand. Each card has a value printed underneath the rank of the card. You can see the value is 1 on these 7 cards, but the higher the card, the higher the value. 11s, for example, show a 2. Each one of these tracer points that you have in your hand are going to be worth points out on this board as well, so you're going to be scoring points for those. So being stuck with cards in hand is not necessarily good, although low cards are okay to be stuck with. So white scored the 2 from the board, but they're also going to score 2 from the pair of 7s, giving them 4 points. And each player on the board would score in the same way. So if green were out here like this, they would have 1 point out on the board and however many points they had in their hand. After you've done this, you're going to start by dealing out a new hand, and that's going to work in the same way. You'll go ahead and you'll flip the top card of the deck in order to see who gets the black hat, and you'll deal out the cards appropriately for that round, again with the leader being the player to the right of the black hat. And you'll play in this manner until one of 2 things essentially happens. New rounds occurring after one player runs out of cards, but the game ending when you hit several or one of 2 different options on the board. The first is that somebody will land in this critical access spot, and that will end the game and the round. The other is that no pawns are able to move or be moved on the board, and there are special spaces on this board that can make that happen. One is the alarm spot right here. If a pawn is to move into this alarm spot, it's going to be stuck there permanently. In addition, if you're playing with a special tracer rule, it's going to activate the tracer. The tracer is going to be a special pawn that's going to be able to move out onto the board after a certain number of tricks won by the player who's in the alarm spot. Each time the player in the alarm spot wins a trick, they must move not only one of their own pawns or one of their opponent's pawns that's in a negative spot, but they must also move the tracer 1 space. Now, we have this beginning tracer that's going to move 4 times before it moves out onto the board here. But when it does move out onto the board after 4 moves, it's going to capture any pawns that are on the spots that it's on and move them to the tracer jail, which is this spot that it's sitting on here. Those pawns are stuck there for the rest of the game and will be worth 5 points, which is not great. And so this will advance each time that player moves in order to capture other pawns on the board. In this manner, players can be eliminated from the game, so you have to be careful where you land. In addition, there's the honeypot space here, and you'll see both of these spots have a red outline around them. The first player to move into the honey spot will be stuck there and no longer able to move, but it will only catch the first player to move there, and the same is true of the alarm spot, because you always jump over pawns that happen to be in front of you, unless it's the tracer that happens to be moving. So you're going to want to try and either manipulate these positions in order to capture other players' pieces off of the board, or maybe you want to get stuck in the honeypot space because it's only worth 0 points. 0 being good in this case. So these are the positions that are available on the start board, the game ending when one player reaches critical access or when no pawns are able to move. But there are additional tiles you can place out on the board to adjust the game. You'll see them here, and these are all double-sided, and they have different types of tile spaces on them. So you can see here we have phone numbers, which are worth 5 points, those are bad, and root axis, which is worth -1, no special abilities. But on the reverse side here, you can see that we have denial of service. This is a spot that will capture the first player to move in there and allow them to move any pawn on the board, including ones trapped in the alarm or honeypot, back to either the back door or public server. So they can send somebody back to the beginning, even one of their own trapped pawns. In addition, whenever they win a trick, whoever's stuck in the denial of service area, they have the option of moving the tracer. They don't have to move it, but they can if they would like to. We also have the randomizer on tiles, worth 0 points, but when you land on there, you have the option of taking one of these tiles at random and placing it out onto the board. When you do so, you would then activate that tile for each person that happens to be on it, starting in the upper left and looking to see if there are any special spaces. If there are, activating them for each pawn that happens to be on them at that time. We also have the exploit. When you land on the exploit, you can increase or decrease the value of any other host or tile space on the board by 1. So landing on here allows you to adjust the values of tiles out on the board. These tiles can be used in any combination you would like at the start of the game, placing them out on these various different areas in order to give you different combinations and different styles of play based on the type of game that you would like for your different players in the game. So you can randomize this. It gives you a good variety of how things can play out. In addition, there are random critical assets that can be placed over this spot at the end of the game. And when a player first lands on this, you're going to reveal what it does. Each one of these has a different ability. So this one, for example, is minus X. It's worth negative points, which is good. On it says X is the lowest number of points scored by any player beside yourself in the end scoring. So you're going to go ahead and look at the end of the game what the lowest number of points is scored for a spot, and you will score that many points as long as you weren't the person that scored the lowest. So the other player's lowest score that they got from a tile. Other ones, for example, say you don't get any endgame scoring when you land here, or this is worth negative points equal to the number of drinks that were finished during the game. Or, for example, this one's worth -5, but all points are rounded to the nearest multiple of 10. So, based on which one of these is placed out here, you can have different endgame scoring, giving you different kind of things to shoot for by the end of the game. Whichever player has the lowest score by the end of the game, which is when either a player reaches the critical asset spot, or with one of these tiles, 2 players reach the critical asset spot, or none of the pawns on the board can move, will be the winner. And there you have it. That is Black Hat, a trick-taking / board game for 2 to 6 players. This game has an interesting twist to it, especially with that Black Hat card, which flips everything kind of on its end at times. You know, you're usually playing for having the highest combination equal to the number of cards that were led. So you want to have, 3 7s over 3 5s that were led or something like that in order to move your pawn along the board or move one of your opponents from a good spot so that they are now taking more points, being bad. So there's that aspect, but once you throw that Black Hat card in there, all of a sudden it's the opposite, and now the low set is going to win. And you have to be very careful of that at specific times, and as the player with the Black Hat, figure out the best time to use it. Now you want to do something cool with that Black Hat because you have it in hand, but it's tricky because you don't want to get caught with it. So you want to make sure that you're handing it to somebody else, that player may get stuck with it because it's worth 5 points if you have it in hand at the end of the round. So having it, not good. It also always has to be played as a part of a set. So if somebody else led 3 cards and you can't play it as a part of 3 cards, you simply can't get it out of your hand. So timing that is very important. The game has a lot of variety in it in terms of the number of tiles you can place on the board, the different endgame scoring conditions you can have, and a lot of choices to be made as to whether or not you want to move yourself into a sometimes compromising position. Do you want to move on to the alarm or the honeypot because they're worth low points and never be able to move your pawn again? Or would you like to free them using particular spots on the board that will allow you to kick them back to the start? Or is it worth moving one of your opponents back to the start so they don't get as many negative points or score more points at the end of a round? So lots of choices to be made, lots of variety to have, and some kind of backwards thinking that you have to wrap your head around in order to play the game well. If that sounds good to you, check it out. I'm sure they'd be happy to have your support.
Thanks for watching our review today. For more information about board games, as well as the #1 board game audio podcast, check out Dicetower.com for reviews, interviews, and more. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.